December 3, 1944, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, 9:12 a.m. The train doors slid open with a metallic groan and winter rushed inside like a weapon. Cold air cut through the wooden cars as Japanese prisoners of war stepped down onto frozen American soil for the first time. They were skeletal, uniforms in rags, faces hollowed by weeks of hunger, disease, and fear. Since the first day they put on a uniform, they had been told the same thing. Capture meant torture, starvation, humiliation. To surrender was to forfeit the right to be treated as human. They braced for violence. They expected screams, blows, blood in the snow. Instead, they smelled food. Not scraps, not thin soup, but something rich, heavy, warm. Smoke drifted from kitchen chimneys beyond the barbed wire. The scent of meat and frying oil floated across the white ground, impossible to ignore. One prisoner whispered under his breath, "This must be a trick." At that moment, none of them understood what they were stepping into. They did not know this camp would shatter everything they believed about their enemy. They did not know that within hours their bodies would be fed, their wounds cleaned, their teeth examined. They did not know that the greatest shock of captivity would not be cruelty, but normality. Because while Japan was starving by late 1944, America was overflowing. Factories ran day and night. Supply trucks never stopped. Food, fuel, and steel moved across the continent in quantities Japan could no longer imagine. And here in the middle of Wisconsin, that abundance was about to collide head-on with men who had survived on roots, rainwater, and propaganda. This is not a story about battles or generals. It is not about victory or defeat. This is the story of a moment when hunger met plenty, when fear met order, and when soldiers trained to die rather than surrender discovered something far more unsettling than violence. Their enemy lived in a completely different world, and that realization began here, on a cold morning, at the end of a train line, with the smell of food in the air. The prisoners were ordered into formation. They stood stiff in the snow boots, too thin for the cold bodies shaking beneath torn uniforms. Some trembled from exposure, others from something deeper: confusion, fear without a target. They waited for the moment it would begin. It didn't. No rifle butts, no kicks, no shouting beyond clipped instructions. The guards barked commands, but their hands stayed at their sides. No one struck them. No one mocked them. That silence was unsettling. American medics moved down the line, not hurried, not rough. They checked pulses, took temperatures, examined infected cuts that had gone untreated for months. One medic knelt in front of an older prisoner and carefully unwrapped a filthy bandage from his arm. The wound beneath was angry and swollen. Instead of recoiling, the medic cleaned it, sprinkled sulfa powder, and wrapped it again with fresh gauze. The prisoner didn't speak English, but he understood care. For men raised on the belief that surrender erased all worth, this was deeply disorienting. They had been prepared for cruelty. They had rehearsed suffering. They had not prepared for procedure. Next came delousing. Their lice-infested uniforms were burned. They were showered, scrubbed, given new clothes, real clothes. Then came medical exams, thorough ones. A dentist even inspected their teeth. One prisoner muttered bitterly, "They care more for our teeth than our honor." A Red Cross official addressed them through an interpreter. His tone was calm, administrative, almost boring. He explained the rules. The Geneva Convention. Food, shelter, letters home, work assignments with pay, no abuse. Many didn't believe a word. Words were easy. Actions would tell the truth. That night, they lay on narrow cots beneath wool blankets. The barracks were quiet except for breathing and the occasional muffled sob. Some men stared at the ceiling. Others turned their faces to the wall. "They're softening us," one whispered. "They'll break us later." Another voice answered from the dark. "Or this is simply how they live." That idea was harder to accept than torture. The thought that this wasn't an act, that the abundance wasn't staged, that the order, the food, the calm, was normal. By late 1944, Japan was starving. Supply lines had collapsed. Soldiers survived on handfuls of rice, sometimes tree bark. Malnutrition wasn't an exception. It was the rule. America was different. Not just stronger, structured, predictable, full. And the prisoners felt it before they understood it. In the warmth of the barracks, in the weight of the blankets, in the quiet absence of fear. Morning would bring the moment that changed everything. But already on that first night, something fundamental had cracked. Not their bodies, their beliefs. Morning came quietly. No alarms, no shouting, just the sound of boots on wooden floors and the low murmur of guards calling roll. The prisoners lined up again, slower now, eyes scanning faces, hands, rifles still waiting for the violence they had been promised. Instead, they were marched toward the mess hall. It was long, low, and warm. Steam rolled out as the doors opened. Heat wrapped around them like a shock to the body. Then the smell hit thick, heavy, unmistakable. Meat, not broth, not ration soup. Real meat sizzling on a grill. For some, it triggered hunger so sharp it hurt. For others, suspicion. Stomachs clenched. Hearts raced. Men whispered to each other as if speaking louder might make it disappear. "This is where it happens," someone muttered. "They'll take it away." The line moved forward. An American cook stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, expression bored, almost indifferent. He dropped a hot hamburger patty onto a soft bun, added fried potatoes. Then he reached down, popped the cap off a glass bottle, and slid it onto the tray. Coca-Cola, bright red letters, condensation on the glass. The cook didn't look at them. "Move along." The tray didn't disappear. No one shouted. No one laughed. They sat at long tables in silence, staring down at the food like it was dangerous. One man lifted the bottle, sniffed it, then took a cautious sip. The sweetness exploded in his mouth, followed by the sharp bite of carbonation. He coughed, then laughed, a short, startled sound that turned heads across the room. Another prisoner picked up the hamburger with both hands. Grease ran down his wrists. He took a slow bite, chewed carefully, then his face collapsed. He lowered his head, shoulders shaking. "I forgot what fat tasted like," he whispered. Around the room, men ate and cried at the same time. Some hid their faces. Others stared at the walls, trying to understand what this meant. They debated in low voices. "They're fattening us to weaken our spirit." No another replied. "This is how they eat." That answer was unbearable. Because if this wasn't a feast, if this wasn't propaganda, if this was just an ordinary meal, then the war had been built on a lie too large to ignore. For the American guards, nothing was unusual. They ate the same food, drank the same soda, To them, this was procedure. For the prisoners, it was an earthquake. They finished in silence. Trays were collected, lines reformed. As they walked back to the barracks, no one spoke. That night, lying in the dark, a voice cut through the quiet. "What do you think your family eats tonight?" No one answered. Outside, the wind scraped against the walls. Inside, the realization settled in heavy, inescapable. The enemy had not beaten them with fists or bullets. He had beaten them with abundance, and the war would never feel the same again. Days turned into weeks, not with drama, with routine. Wake up, roll call, work detail, lunch, more work, dinner, lights out. The rhythm settled in quietly, almost dangerously normal. The prisoners were assigned to labor crews clearing snow from roads, repairing fences, hauling supplies. The work was cold and steady, but not punishing. No beatings, no starvation. At the end of the week, they were paid in camp coupons, money. With it, they could buy soap, writing paper, toothpaste, even candy, chocolate. The first time one of them held a chocolate bar, his hands trembled. In Japan, chocolate was medicine, something rare prescribed almost mythical. Here it sat on a shelf like bread. He broke off a piece and let it melt slowly on his tongue. The sweetness was so intense it hurt. He wrapped the rest carefully and hid it, unsure why he couldn't finish it. English classes were offered in the evenings. Some prisoners refused. They said learning the enemy's language was betrayal. Others went anyway. Survival had its own logic. They sat on wooden benches repeating simple words after an American teacher: bread, table, window, family. That last word hung in the air. One night the teacher wrote a sentence on the board: "I miss my family." He asked a young prisoner to read it aloud. The words came slowly, thick with accent. When he finished, the room went quiet. The teacher nodded once. "We all miss someone," he said. For the first time since capture, the prisoner felt something loosen inside him. Not pride, not hope. Recognition. But kindness was not universal. On a work detail outside the camp, an American farmer watched them with hard eyes. His son had been killed somewhere in the Pacific. When a prisoner bent to pick up a dropped tool, the farmer spat near his boots. "Should have left them to starve," he muttered. The guard said nothing. He simply ordered the crew back to camp. That night, the prisoners talked about it in whispers. "Not all Americans follow their rules," one said. "Of course not," another replied. "They're men like us." Inside the barracks, life found strange ways to continue. Men carved small wooden toys from scraps. They played improvised games. They told stories of home carefully, as if speaking too loudly might erase the memories. A young guard sometimes lingered by the fence after his shift. He carried photographs, his parents, his sisters in Sunday dresses. He showed them through the wire. The prisoners nodded. They didn't understand his words. They understood the faces. One prisoner drew a house in the dirt, a tree, a woman standing in the doorway. "Mother?" the guard asked. The prisoner touched his chest. "Ha ha," he said softly. The guard smiled. The moment passed, but it stayed. Still tension simmered. Some prisoners warned against softening. "Every smile is a trap," they said. "Every kindness weakens us." Arguments broke out at night. "What does honor matter if we don't survive?" one man asked. No one answered, because there was no answer that didn't hurt. And beneath the blankets, staring at the ceiling, many realized the most dangerous thing in this camp wasn't hunger or fear. It was doubt. By the spring of 1945, the camp felt different. Nothing had changed on paper. The same schedules, the same meals, the same guards. But beneath the routine, something was unraveling. Rumors began to circulate, carried in whispers and half-finished sentences. Tokyo was burning. Entire districts reduced to ash overnight. American bombers were striking city after city with no sign of slowing. The Philippines were gone. Okinawa was bleeding. Some prisoners rejected the news outright. Lies, they said. Psychological warfare. Japan will never surrender. They said it loudly, repeated it often, as if volume could turn it into truth. Others listened and said nothing. They had stopped arguing because the argument no longer mattered. Every day the evidence rolled past them in plain sight. American supply trucks moved through Camp McCoy like clockwork. Canvas-covered engines, humming tires, crunching over gravel, fuel, food, medical supplies, tools. Crates stacked high, unloaded, replaced, sent onward again. There were no gaps, no delays, no desperation. Back home, scarcity defined everything. Rice was rationed by the spoonful. Clothing was repaired until it disintegrated. Soldiers were sent to remote islands with barely enough ammunition, barely enough food, and orders that assumed sacrifice would somehow replace logistics. Here, sacrifice wasn't needed. This country ran on excess. One afternoon during a work detail near the service road, a prisoner paused beside a parked truck. Its rear doors were open just long enough to reveal the cargo inside wooden crates, packed tight with glass bottles layered in ice. Coca-Cola, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Enough to supply bases scattered across the Midwest. Enough that losing a few crates would mean nothing. The prisoner stood there staring, doing the math without numbers. A guard noticed and smirked. "Crazy, huh?" he said. "We got enough coke to drown the whole Pacific." It was meant as a joke. It landed like a verdict. That night, the prisoner wrote in his notebook by dim light, careful to keep his body angled away from prying eyes. He wrote slowly, deliberately, as if carving the words into himself. "I believe Japan was the center of the world. Now I see we are only one small island." He folded the page and hid it beneath his mattress. If it was discovered, he would be accused of betrayal, perhaps worse. But once the thought existed, it could not be erased. The realization came in waves, in the warmth of the barracks, in the fullness of his stomach, in the predictability of tomorrow. America did not live day to day. It planned months ahead, years ahead. This war was not being fought between equals. Courage could not replace fuel. Spirit could not manufacture aircraft. Honor could not feed an army when the fields were empty and the factories silent. The equation was brutally simple. Japan was fighting with belief. America was fighting with capacity. Some prisoners reacted with anger. Their voices grew sharper. Their loyalty more rigid. Pride became a shield against despair. Others withdrew entirely. They spoke less, ate quietly, stared longer into the dark. At night, the barracks were different now. Fewer arguments, more silence. The kind of silence that comes after the answer is already known. They were still prisoners of war. But in their minds, the war they had been sent to fight, the war they had been willing to die for, was already over. They just didn't know how or when the world would admit it. Beyond the wire, the machinery of victory kept moving, and soon the news would arrive that would silence everything else. The news arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no speeches, no dramatic announcement. It came in fragments, passed quietly, from guard to interpreter, from interpreter to prisoner. A single word, repeated until it lost all shape. Hiroshima, then another, Nagasaki, and finally the one word that ended everything: surrender. The camp went silent. Men sat on their bunks staring at the floor, the walls, their hands anywhere but at each other. Some wept openly. Others clenched their fists until their knuckles whitened. A few shook with anger or grief or something that could not yet be named. There was no celebration from the guards, no cheers, no triumph. The routine continued: roll call, meals, work details. That steadiness was unbearable. For years, these men had been taught that defeat meant annihilation, that surrender erased all meaning. And yet here they were alive, watching the world continue, as if history itself had simply turned a page. One prisoner felt nothing at first. No shock, no tears, only numbness. His mother had lived in Hiroshima. He would not know her fate today, or tomorrow, or perhaps ever. The uncertainty settled in his chest like a weight that refused to move. Weeks passed. Preparations for repatriation began quietly. Red Cross officials returned. Medical checks were repeated. Clean uniforms were issued. Lists were drawn up. Names read aloud. Men packed what little they had. Wooden carvings, letters never sent. Small objects that had somehow survived the war intact. On the day of departure, they filed through the gates of Camp McCoy one last time. No one spoke. One prisoner glanced back at the barracks, the mess hall, the guard tower where a young American had once shown him photographs of his family. He felt no fondness, but he felt something else: confusion, gratitude, shame. He had expected cruelty. He had received food. The journey home was long and quiet. The Pacific stretched gray and endless. Men huddled together, thinking of cities they might not recognize, families that might no longer exist. When he finally stepped onto Japanese soil, the world he knew was gone. Cities reduced to ash. Neighborhoods erased. Hunger, worse than anything he had known as a soldier. His mother had not survived. He learned that from a neighbor 3 days after his return. For weeks he barely spoke. He worked clearing rubble, rebuilding walls, carrying stones from one place to another as if motion alone could hold him together. One evening a child approached him, thin, eyes too large for his face. "Do you have food?" the boy asked. The man reached into his pocket. Inside was a small piece of chocolate saved from the camp canteen. He had carried it across the ocean without knowing why. He unwrapped it slowly and placed it in the child's hand. The boy smiled as he tasted it. And in that moment, something shifted. Years later, when his own son asked him about the war, he chose his words carefully. He did not speak of battles. He did not speak of honor. He spoke only of food. "I learned," he said quietly, "that cruelty is easy to carry. Kindness is heavier." His son did not understand. But some truths are not meant to be explained. They must be remembered. The war ended on paper in 1945. But for the men who passed through places like Camp McCoy, it never truly ended there. They carried it home in fragments, in memories they struggled to explain, in questions that had no safe answers. Some spoke cautiously, choosing their words as if they were still being watched. Others never spoke at all. Silence became a form of protection against judgment, against shame, against the unbearable complexity of what they had lived through. Because how do you explain that the enemy fed you better than your own army ever could? How do you reconcile loyalty with gratitude? How do you return to a ruined homeland carrying memories of warmth, order, and full stomachs behind barbed wire? For many, those memories felt like betrayal. They rebuilt cities from ash, raised families, learned to survive in a country stripped bare. Outwardly, life moved forward. Inwardly, something remained unresolved. They remembered the taste of a hamburger, the sting of carbonation, the shock of sweetness, not as comfort, but as contradiction. Years passed, decades. The world changed. The war became history, dates in textbooks, grainy footage, numbers too large to feel real. But the small moments endured. A medic kneeling in the snow, a guard showing faded photographs, a piece of chocolate saved for no clear reason. These were not acts of strategy. They were not calculated gestures. They were human. And that is why they lasted. One former prisoner once said that cruelty was easy to understand. You could fight it. You could hate it. You could build your identity against it. Kindness was different. Kindness forced reflection. Kindness demanded memory. Kindness stayed. The legacy of camps like Camp McCoy is not found in treaties or victory parades. It lives in the quiet, uncomfortable space where enemies briefly saw each other not as symbols, but as people. Those moments did not end the war. They did not erase suffering. They did not undo loss, but they survived it. And in a century defined by destruction on an industrial scale, that survival matters. Because war strips men of rank, of certainty, of hope. It turns nations into abstractions and people into targets. Yet even there, even at the lowest point, small acts of humanity endured. A meal, a blanket, a word spoken without hate. They remind us that history is not only shaped by those who command armies, but by those who choose restraint when cruelty is easier. These moments rarely make headlines. They do not fit neatly into myths of victory or defeat, but they outlast the noise of cannons and the silence that follows. And they ask a question that echoes long after the war is over. If humanity could survive there, what excuse do we have to lose it now? That is the legacy. And that is the story worth remembering. For many of the men who returned from camps like Camp McCoy, the hardest part of the war did not end with surrender. It began afterward. They went home to a country that had lost everything. Its cities, its certainty, its myth of invincibility. Hunger was everywhere. Grief was assumed. Silence was expected. And silence was what they gave. Not because they forgot, but because remembering was dangerous. In post-war, Gem honor was not something you debated. It was something you carried or lost forever. To survive as a prisoner was already a stain. To admit that the enemy had treated you with kindness was worse. It sounded like betrayal, so they learned to separate their lives in two. What happened out there stayed buried. What was allowed to be remembered fit neatly into the national story: sacrifice, endurance, loss. Anything that complicated that story, anything that blurred the line between enemy and human, was pushed down and sealed away. Many never told their wives, never told their children, never told anyone. Because how do you explain that the men you were trained to hate fed you when your own country could not? How do you admit that a hamburger, a blanket, a quiet word across barbed wire shook your beliefs more than bombs ever did? In a culture shaped by shame, gratitude toward the enemy felt unforgivable. So silence became survival. It protected them from judgment, from accusations, from the unbearable question of whether loyalty had cost them more than it gave. Over time, that silence hardened into habit. Years passed. The war receded into textbooks and memorials. The official history grew cleaner, simpler. Heroes and victims, right and wrong, victory and defeat. But personal memory does not obey official history. It lingers in the body, in the taste of food, in the weight of an unspoken thought. Some men tried to speak decades later. Their voices trembled. Their words came out carefully as if still asking permission. Others never did. They carried those memories to the grave, convinced that some truths were too disruptive to release. Not because they were false, but because they were true. History prefers clarity. Memory is complicated. And so an entire layer of the war remained largely invisible, not erased, but hidden. A quiet undercurrent beneath the noise of battles and declarations. It is in that silence that the real cost of war can be found. Not just in what was destroyed, but in what could not be said. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones that were shouted. They are the ones that were swallowed. And that is why for so long they never talked.